Set an alarm for 2:30. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, where we left off, we were practicing annotations for reading in tab order. And I was starting to get into some more complicated examples. Oh, right, floating buttons pattern. All right. Again, apologies to the team that does my company homepage. This chat button is faked up and added at the bottom corner. This is not an actual screenshot of our website. I'm just doing this for illustration purposes. Okay, so everybody's got a floating chat button. Floating chat buttons are super handy for relying on vision that can use a mouse, because you can see them and quickly get to them no matter where they are on the page. So they always hang out on the side of the page. They cause a huge problem. I'm going to focus on two user groups. I'm going to focus on Jim, who's my screen reader user, and Tony, who has good vision.
I don't know if you started, but I can't hear you on Zoom.
And so she can't use a mouse, she's using a keyboard. And Jim's problem, Jim is probably never, ever, ever, ever going to know that that chat button is even there. So Jim using the page with a screen reader, he's likely to do one of two techniques. He's going to read the page top to bottom.
Hey, Claire, can you hear us? We can't hear you.
People, maybe older people. A lot of people don't have the patience to ever actually read the page top to bottom. But when you do read the page top to bottom, he's just going to read the page top to bottom until he finds the most useful thing to him and clicks on it. So if he's a long-time user, this gets into walk up and learn usability versus long-time users, right? So on my company homepage, this is a shopping site. I want random people that come here to be successful, even if it's the first time they've ever been here. It's different than inside digital banking, where you have repeat people that are logging in month after month after month to do their bills, and you might discover something over time. Other thing Jim may do is...
We can't hear you on Zoom. Can you hear us?
I heard that. I didn't hear what he said, though. Did he say that he can't hear me? Yeah, he can hear you. All right, I may need to start my example over again. Give me a moment. Thank you for letting us know. All right, are y'all able to hear me now on the Zoom? Volume is very low. I don't know, this is about the same place that I had it this morning. Something changed from this morning. I can move this up a little higher maybe and see if that makes any difference. All right, I'm talking again. Am I still being too quiet, folks, on the Zoom? Better. Maybe I did put it in a slightly different spot. Okay. All right, so let me reintroduce the scenario. So the scenario is a floating button, which is very easy for users relying on vision and a mouse to get to. Screen reader user, probably never going to find it, because they're either going to read the page top to bottom and just never know it's there, or they're going to jump around the page by headings, and again, there's probably no logical heading that it belongs to. Tony, who has rheumatoid arthritis and can't use a mouse a lot of days and is a keyboard user, is going to be frustrated because at some point that button has code associated with it, right? So at some point you have to decide where on the page that button lives. And most often when people aren't thinking about it too hard, it lives as like the last code on the page, probably even after the footer code. So Tony on our homepage might have to tab 100 times in order to get to that thing. So she may give up before then and just assume it's not keyboard accessible. So let's talk about where do you want that chat to live on the page? Like, where if you were going to pick logically where, like imagine, what does it go with on the page? The chat button. Yes, I got Lewis, hand on the back, to your left hand.
The search, because they need help.
They need help. And yes, so up by search, how can we help you? So that's a great logical place for it to connect to. Any other ideas?
The contact button?
Contact
Contact us.
button? Yes, so also still up with the header stuff? Yeah.
Maybe make it a heading.
Ooh, give it its own heading. I like that. So that in the site outline that you would find it. Now that's going to help Jim, who's our screen reader user and has superpowers to be able to jump by headings. That's probably not going to help Tony. While there are some browser plugins that let you see all the headings and jump by heading, that's kind of an advanced thing to add something like that to your browser. I don't think Tony looks advanced enough to do that. Yes?
If the goal is maybe conversion, adding a button in that hero header on the homepage might help somebody who might need to talk to somebody about identifying a bank account they might qualify for.
Right, so most important thing on the site is conversion and getting people to sign up for accounts. And also it kind of makes sense that like this is clearly because this is above the fold, right? This is the one thing that I really want them to do on the site. So maybe put that after this. So as Tony's tabbing through after she gets to the first main show of the page, she gets to that. So I've got a couple, so one of the things that I don't want to do, you could just logically add numbers to the page to decide when you want that to get focused, right? So I could decide right now that I'm going to tab through the top, and then after we get to how can we help you, maybe, that the next thing it tabs to, or well, how can we help you in search, because those go together, and then like the next thing it tabs to is chat. Go back to my my eye tracker example, right? So Tony's tabbing through the page, she's tabbing through the top of the page, focus suddenly jumps all the way down to that chat button and then goes back up. She's never, ever, ever going to notice that, right? Because her focus of attention is at the top of the page. It's so common on websites for focus to just disappear every so often and have random extra stuff that gets focused and you don't see it. She's just going to see search focused and then nothing in the locations focused, and she's going to totally miss that chat ever got focused. So that would be a nice idea, but I think in practice it's not going to work. So one thing to think about is logically that chat being in the bottom right corner. Oh, y'all can't see it. Do y'all have the ability to get that video off of there for what we're showing on our screen? Oh, thank you. Sorry, folks, that was covering up a lot of my personas this morning. So it kind of logically goes at the beginning of the footer after, if you've got, you're following, again, my weird thing about putting headings in the header and the footer. You've got a footer, maybe you have a heading, and then chat is right after that. So a logical place. So what I might do is actually have that chat button as the first thing in the footer. And then what I would do is I would actually add a second chat button somewhere up in the header. So just like the skip navigation link that suddenly appears when you focus it, I would add a second chat button up where you all were talking about, somewhere around the search, locations, contact us, and a second button appears up here when you focus it and then goes away. And it would be something that people would discover by accident, but since it would always be there, right, Jim would find that really easily because he's reading the page top to bottom, and so he would find it in the header. Or a lot of times when people don't find stuff, they'll jump to the footer. Jim would find the second one that's in the footer because he would read through all the footer links for help and so on. And Tony will find that by accident as she's going through the page and be very excited to be able to get to it in like 8 tabs instead of 100. There are a lot of ways that you could implement. You could do this same thing like you said by putting it either before or after the main call to action or the hero image for the page or something. I'm not saying that this is the right way. I'm saying that it's something that you should think about and then decide what you want to do and how you're going to make it easier for folks to find it and get to it. Now, really advanced users, you could do things like you could assign a keyboard shortcut to it. And again, how many people are chatting often enough that they need to memorize a keyboard shortcut? I don't know that I would go that far for this, but there are other floating buttons that you might use that for in other situations. Yeah, and again, what I would not do is have focus jump from locations down there and up there, because people would miss that. That gets back to the Gestalt principle and your fovea and your focus, and that's just so far away you're never going to see it. This is just a checklist to take home with you. I'm not going to go through it. All right, so let's practice what we've been talking about with forms. So let's do an interactive thing together. Let me make sure, let me get this now over. Come back. It's not my computer. Right, okay. So here's an example form. So you've got 4 fields. You could show hide the social security number. You've got a checkbox for the phone number to indicate whether or not it's mobile. And what I'd like to do is annotate this out. So let's start out with, I think on this it's pretty clear what is and isn't interactive, right? You could click on the 4 text fields, the show hide, the mobile number. So for the moment, I don't know. So let's talk about how many different, what order to do this in? So let's talk about first just that social security number field. What would you annotate on that social security number field? Let's just go through that, and then we'll step back and talk about the page as a whole. What's the reading order on that social security number field?
The label and then the helper text.
The label and then the helper text. Where does show hide password fit into that?
Third.
All right, so we've got a vote that it's going to be social security number, the helper text, and then show hide password. Other ideas? I've got a nod in the back row. We've got a hand over here.
I guess I would make the box social security number, and it would say enter text, and then the show hide button, and then the helper text.
So I would avoid any hints like enter text. People know, like the text field already has a role that says, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying what the screen reader would say. I wasn't.
Oh, okay. So yeah, so what the screen reader would say is edit. Yeah, so you get social security number, edit, then the hint text, then show hide password button. Okay. So what you annotate on this, it depends on your own system patterns and are you using a design system or not. So if I were, like this were maybe the only time that I was building this, right? So I would probably, am I going to be able to? All right. I'm on a loader, and I'm not going to be able to do that well enough. All right, so we'll talk it through, and then I'll show you my answer. So when I'm designing this out, I want to show that you go from social security number and its associated things to that show hide password icon, and then on to whatever's next. So I would annotate, there's one interactive element. I gotta say that the idea that social security number and then the field and then the hint, to me, that depends on how advanced your team is. Like, that seems so basic to me. I would put one number on that and then a second number on the show hide. If your development team is novice enough that you need to annotate that you get social security number and then the field and then the hint, you've probably got a lot of other problems on your hands. Now, for us using our design system, that's a component. We actually have a password field component designed by our design systems team. That icon comes with the component. We don't make folks annotate stuff that's inside components, because the component comes with its own annotations and its own wireframes. And so there would just be one big number next to the whole thing. So that's part of the arguments that I use to try and convince people to shift to our design system, is that it then makes less work on annotating things when you create designs. So for today, let's now pretend we've got, maybe we've got use social security numbers a lot, right? So you've got social security number as a pattern documented somewhere. So for this page, we'll just consider that a blob. How many things on this page do you need to annotate? Right, so if social security number is one and date of birth is another one, right? What on this needs an annotation number next to it to make sure you get this right? Oh, Louis, you look like you're just itching to talk. Yeah. It's not on. I did. Is it low on battery?
Keep going.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Louis. I need to take an attendee before you. Back row, we've got someone.
Yeah. Well, we need to make sure that the checkbox for this is a mobile phone comes directly after they go to the phone number.
Thank you, yes. Oh my gosh.
Because it's two-column back and forth thing, yeah.
The first time I saw this page implemented, this was implemented with the content order was phone and then email and then this is a mobile phone. Because the developer just took the page and laid it out in some CSS grid that looked pretty, right? So, and in fact, how about those providing, right? You also want to make sure that providing your phone number comes after the checkbox. So you want the content order to be phone number, this is a mobile phone, by providing your phone number you agree, and then email, and then by providing your email. Now the fact that we've had to talk about this so long already says you've got a complicated layout and you should think about whether you really want to do this. And it's the constant battle of the compact versus the easy, right? If this were one column layout, you wouldn't be having this problem or this discussion because it would all be in one thing. But then there's a lot of scrolling and a lot of vertical, and so there's some advantage. I mean, there are always times when you need to do the two-column layout. We have to deal with this. However, that gets to one more moment. Let's say if you are being consistent about delivering your desktop layout and your mobile layout, right? Your mobile, when this goes to mobile responsive, it's going to go down to one column. That's your order annotation. If you're delivering your desktop and your mobile wireframe, you don't need to annotate this out because your mobile layout is your reading order for the desktop layout as well, assuming you're responsive and not adaptive, which I'm hoping by now everyone is. Louis, yes, you had a question.
So you're talking components, which I like that.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious, is the phone number component everything from phone number through the by providing, and the email component being from email to by providing, or those caveats separate from the component?
No. For us, the input field with its label and its hint is a component.
Okay.
The checkbox with its label is a component. And then the random text below it is just random text.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That I can see if you always use those things together,
Mm-hmm.
it seems almost like it could be its own component, because you
Yeah.
don't separate it.
So that then gets into levels of components. So our design system is very small, right? It's checkboxes and buttons. And then it does get a little more complicated, right? Like an accordion is a group of buttons and headings. And so you might then have probably for us, our digital banking team would have their own pattern for every time we collect a phone number, we do it like this. And that would be for a platform-specific pattern, more likely. But we do have some components that have collected them together, like card. We have card components that have a couple buttons and a heading and a container around them. But we don't get into like page templates belong with the platform and not with the design system. So what we would do here, I've noted that password component is all one thing. If you were really going to annotate it out, right, it's all one item in the reading order, and I would note that, you know, there's the number and then the field and then the hint ABC, and then the show hide is D because it's part of the same component. I haven't gotten this question here, but I will mention this again, that the checkbox and its label all go together. You don't need to annotate those separately. Like, you're never going to have a checkbox without a label, unless it's in a table, right? And then that's its own problem. So you don't need to annotate the text and the checkbox separately.
So I was taking a look here at the items for the Social Security number 2 Alpha, 2 Bravo, 2 Charlie. That reminds me a bit of what VoiceOver does with its grouping mechanism. And I was wondering if you mentioned that you were going to exercise some caution when using VoiceOver. And I was wondering if when you get to that point, you were going to cover grouping versus flat navigation.
I have an example where we're going to talk about like a primary address and a secondary address and how you group those together. Do you think that would get at your question about how you group all the fields in that?
So basically what I'm referring to is the way VoiceOver would see this is the Social Security number would be 2, and then you could skip past that to item 3. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, so there are two reasons why I use 2 for the whole blob. One is because they're one component. So for me, I have all 4 of those as one blob because it's one component. If I weren't using a design system, I would probably break that into 2. And so I would have the label, the field, and the hint as one blob, and then the show hide as a second, if I weren't using a design system.
Can you use that mic? Because they're saying they still can't hear you.
They're saying that they still can't hear me. Okay, so which microphone do you want me to use? All right.
They said that one's going clear.
Do you have? Right. Y'all now stuck with me picking who gets to talk. Yes.
I can try to be well. So, hate to say this, but I'm kind of lost on that Social Security number because I thought it was different than what you were saying at the other point. So the interactive is the 2, and then the 2A, that means that's interactive too, right?
So what's interactive is the field, right? Only the field is interactive, and that text above it is flat text that just gets read. So if you're tabbing through the page, you would go from the date of birth field, you would skip past the text Social Security number, and you would focus on the field, right? You wouldn't have the field label focused separately from the field unless you've got a really waylaid development team. So that's why I put a 2 on the whole thing, and maybe that 2 should be interactive. I don't know. This is where we do get to the fact that I don't actually make wireframes for the living, so this is a little more theoretical than I might like. But what I'm trying to get at is that the label, the field, and the description are a blob, and then the show hide is another blob, and you need to take care of both of them. I'm not doing a good job of answering that.
So 2 is basically denoting that this is an interactive.
Yeah, it just, it probably should, you're right, 2 probably should be an interactive and be a blue pill instead of the pink circle. Yeah, I think that would be more clear. And then when you get into the details, you break down that the interactive part is actually the field inside of it. Yeah, yeah, I think you got a good point. These slides are never perfect. And yeah, what you want to avoid is this, which I have seen implemented, and I died a little inside when I got this. All right, buttons versus links. What is a button and what is a link is very cut and dried. The rule is different for web and for app. So for web, buttons submit forms and go to a new page, or they affect the current page. They switch tabs, they apply a filter, they open and close an accordion or a modal or tooltip. Links go to a new page, or they jump to a spot lower on the page. In a native mobile app, button stays in the app, link leaves the app and goes to a web page. This does get a little weird when you deal with web views, because web views are web content. And so it means that between the web view content and the native app content, you have a disconnect in how they work. And I don't think there's a good answer for that. I certainly don't have a good answer to that. That's why this is an intermediate class, not advanced. I'm going to dodge that question. But a couple other key things about this. When you follow a link, the back button returns you to the previous page. This is one of those things where when you start implementing custom links and turning a div into a link, you have to remember when you click on that link that not only you go to a new page, it gets a new title, and it adds a page into the browser history stack. So that when you hit the browser back button, you remove a page from the browser history stack. So another one of these why you don't want to be designing custom stuff. And we're going to get into another reason why this is important in a minute. Same thing, when you do a same page link that jumps you lower on the page, that should add it into the browser history, and when you hit the back button, it should jump back up on the page. That's why just instead of having a fragment, having a JavaScript listener, so that when you select something, it moves focus on the page, you then, again, you have to remember to add that into the browser history stack. Whereas buttons, when they affect the page, don't change the browser history. So like if you use take a button to apply a filter, you can't hit back to undo the filter. Now it gets a lot more complicated when you consider, URL parameters and all that kind of stuff. But I'm going to deal with some simplified examples here. So because there are reasonably cut and dried rules, we don't annotate button versus link, usually. We do it maybe once at the pattern level to establish it, and then we don't make people do it again all the time because you would grow old adding this to the page, and it just clutters up the page so much. It depends a little on the maturity of your team, how much you trust your development partners, whether you want to do this or not. But I also want to highlight here that the visual has absolutely nothing to do with the semantics. Now, I gave this talk a couple years ago at CSUN, and somebody gave me pushback, and they're like, having something that looks the same and does something different, like, isn't that bad? And I have a bad answer to that, which is just, everybody does it, and I think my designers would rebel against me if I tried to change that. And maybe when we're a more mature program and I get to do a lot more usability testing with people with disabilities, I can start fighting that fight, but that's not the hill I want to die on. But So one reason why buttons versus links is really important is I'm going to go back to this NVDA dialogue. JAWS has a similar dialogue. You can actually pull up a separate list of links than buttons, and people have expectations of that. I'll give you an example of where this caused me trouble. This is again back on the BB&T homepage for our site search. We had a button in the header that would open a flyout. And people for search expect one of two ways for it to function. They either expect the field to be on the page, and so I would have advanced users actually using the E button to jump to an editable text field and look for the text field, or they expect it to be a link. So people would open the list of links, you hit S, you jump through all the links that start with S looking for search. And so people were looking for a field or a link, and they never found the button. And I had people fail at finding the site search because they weren't expecting a button without a text field next to it. Again, this is not a WCAG violation. This is a usability problem for assistive technology. But the choice of link versus button, semantically, it does kind of matter. So I have a brand new example for this class. I'm sure you are going to find a lot of typos in this, so bear with me. But I think it's a good illustration. So single page applications are very popular now with frameworks. This kind of stuff, when I took my programming classes in the 90s, didn't exist, so I have an only light idea of how all of this works. You're on the edge of my programming skills here. But the design principles are same page, same title, same URL, different page, different title, different URL. We can argue about whether having different URL parameters counts as a different URL, but as a designer, you should be deciding when you have the same page and when you have a different page, possibly in an arm wrestling competition with your developers based on the constraints of the system. But you need to know when the page title changes because you're annotating it, right? You're annotating the page title. And that's why you need to annotate it, because you need to have an understanding with your developers of what's the same page and what's a different page. What can you bookmark? What can your people create a deep link to? And what's not deep linkable? And what happens when you go back? So we're going back. I watched a lot of Roadrunner cartoons when I was growing up. But it's now in the internet age, and Wile E. Coyote has decided that he's ordered enough from Acme. He's actually going to go to an Acme store, and he wants to find a location. So I've got a generic site design here. I will make a note. I've got that info icon describes the layout of the page for screen reader users. One of the optional topics we can get to in the last hour, if people want, I can talk about this. This deck is completely accessible, and I have text descriptions of every single illustration that I have in this. And if anybody wants to talk about writing text alternatives of complex descriptions, we can go there. Anyway, so you've got on the left side, you've got 4 stores that are roughly in the Phoenix area. Wiley is currently looking at store number 2, and this is the location section of the website. So I'm setting that up as sort of the scenario that we are in. And what I'm going to talk about, so Coyote, he comes to the homepage, and he goes to locations, which by default loads store number 1, and then he's clicked on store number 2. So if we want to annotate this out, the question that I asked my designers, and it wasn't this page, but this happened to me a couple weeks ago, and I was like, well, those stores, are those links or buttons? And my designer had no idea. They didn't know if store 1 and store 2 was on the same page. So let's talk about how that affects your pattern for the pages. So I'm imagining 2 different setups. Visually, these are identical, right? But in the left one, all of the stores are buttons, and in the right one, all of the stores are links. So I have 4 things at the bottom here that I want to talk about. What's the page title for each? What's the H1? What's the H2? And remember, he's gone to store 1 and then store 2. When he hits the back button, what happens? Let's take the easy one, maybe. Well, I don't know. I will start waving at me, I'll run over with the microphone. All right. Tell me what you think.
So for page title, if it's going to appear in a browser, I would say it's Locations Pipe Acme Supply Company.
And is that And is that the page title for the left or the right?
Oh, for the left, I think.
Okay. All right, so we've got that the page title on the left is Locations, pipe sign Acme Company. What's the page title on the right?
Oh, I think the page title on the right would be Store 2,
Followed by?
followed by Locations Acme Supply Company.
Excellent. Okay. So even though store 2 is the biggest text on the page, on the left side, the H1 is for locations, because that's also the page title. Whereas on the right side, store 2 is the H1. And locations is more of the section that you're in. So that gets into some of these ideas about where are your headings, right? And is H1 the first thing on the page? Because in the second one, you don't get your H1 until you're all the way at store 2. So you've got the left nav is all before the H1, and everything in the top is before the H1. So last question is, after you use the back button, what happens on the left one and what happens on the right one? Yes.
So earlier you said that you can change H1 and H2. So couldn't you manually make on the right locations be H1 and store 2 be H2, and then you can have it go to, like, you can manually say, well, you want it to start at H2 when it's reading, but you could still have it be H1 so that it, like, the page title would be the same.
I think you misunderstood me. When you're reading the page top to bottom, it's fine to have, and again, in my book, I'm gathering that this is controversial from some of the kind of side conversations I had at lunch. So, like, I would probably have an H2 at the top of the page for the header, and I'd have, in the right example, I'd have an H2 for that left navigation, maybe, to complement the named region, because I have a unnatural bias against named regions. But the H1 is the label of the page. And the thing is that on the left version, when you click all those buttons, you can hit as many of those buttons as you want to get the different stores, and you're always staying on the same page, which is always locations, which is always the H1. And so when you're on the left one, when you hit the back button, he's going to go back to the home page. Whereas on the right one, if he hit 5 buttons to look at the 5 different stores, he'd have to hit back 5 different times to get back to the home page. And I've seen this matter that, like, if you've done the site search and looked at branch details and then hit the back button and lose all of your work in search, right? How much work do you want to save, and do you want people to be able to redo? On the flip side, do you want someone to be able to bookmark the page for an individual store? Or do you want them to always go back to locations and reset and have them have to pick it? So I'm sorry that I haven't had a chance yet to put all of these into the annotations. But knowing the designers I was talking to a couple weeks ago, like I said, they didn't know whether those buttons on the left were buttons or links. And so they were asking me to help them annotate the headings, and I'm like, I can't help you annotate the headings until I know how the page works. So you can't just make a visual design, you have to understand how your site actually works. And if you don't know this, then you need to go and talk to your developers and have a heart to heart about what your system supports and what it doesn't.
It gets a little bit more complicated sometimes with the URL. So for sure, on the left side, on the right side, you can bookmark it, and it'll always go back to store 2. On the left, you can add some attributes to the URL for JavaScript or other coding to define which instance of the visual page is showing up when you use the bookmark. So you could say, even though normally if you're going through the site, you'll go to store 1 automatically, but you can also have it so the URL has question mark, more data, and always get back to store 2. So if your designer wants it to be a button, but also wants it to be bookmarked, the coder should be able to do it. So it's a weird, even more complicated discussion.
Right. Okay. So now what we're doing is that we're allowing URL parameters that allow you to save what you've entered into your search, right? So you've applied a bunch of filters and check marks, and that all goes into that. So now this is where we start getting a more advanced and more art, right? So maybe now on the left, you've got locations : store 2 is the page title. And when you click a button and it shows a different one, it's locations : store 1. But if you're doing that, are they still, if they now have different page titles, we're now getting into a fuzzy zone. If you're allowing the URL parameters to be bookmarked, are they the same page? Are they different pages? That's definitely getting into a more advanced discussion. So I don't think that there's a good answer on that, but it's a good thing to think about. When you do a search, how much of the search results do you want to include in the page title? How much extra information do you want to share?
And this might be not for this topic either, but we just wanted to switch to a new mortgage application that was a one-page, the one-page site. You fill in some form fields, you press submit, it redraws the page. The screen reader doesn't know it's a page redraw because it's all done via JavaScript, and it would never start reading again. And that's just the issue I've seen with those one-page sites that are all done with JavaScript. And they would tell me there's no workaround, but there's got to be a workaround.
And that's where you get into the fact that your developers don't know accessibility, and they need to have the whole pattern. And so the high-level pattern on that is that you are actually showing a new page. So they're using a single-page application, but they're showing a new page. And so they need to get in the habit of every time you load a new page, you need to move focus to the top. You need to announce the new page title. And top then gets to be a discussion, right? If you've got, think back to my company homepage, which had this huge complicated header. I might, if I'm going through a flow, hopefully you don't have the complicated header inside the flow. When we go through stuff like that, we have a progress bar along the top. So you then need to debate, do you move it back before the progress bar so they can see that the progress has changed, or do you move it to the H1, which is the main content, so they see that you're at step 2, step 3. For me, that depends on how much information is in that progress bar. And if all the progress bar is doing is counting me through steps, then I might move to the H1. If the progress bar has a lot more information, I might move it above the progress bar every time, and they can always use the H key to jump past it. And then we're now getting into live region stuff. And announcements I kind of consider advanced. But the high-level strategy that I would give you on that is that kind of moving focus and making announcements works differently in every screen reader and browser combination, and that you then need to test it in JAWS and NVDA and VoiceOver, definitely VoiceOver for iOS, TalkBack for Android. If you really want to go thorough, you test it for VoiceOver for Mac, but I'll get it later. That's a really, really low user base, and if you don't have time, I would have, like, if you only test a one thing on the PC, I would do NVDA on the PC, iOS for, VoiceOver for iOS, and TalkBack for Android. And listen to it with your single page application and listen to visiting a new page that's traditional HTML, and they should sound similar. And we'll get into a focus management example. That'll be one of the optional topics that folks can vote on. All right, this is just in here to get this is beginner stuff. I'm not going to talk about it. This is just in here because it's part of my next item on my checklist, so I'm going to go past. So here's a screenshot from my design system to give you an example. Like the design, so the design system has that, like number 5 is that X to clear the text field, and you actually can't change the label of that. So it's annotated in the design system documentation. You don't have to annotate it in your wireframe, but you can add icons on the left and the right. So those you do have to annotate. So even if you're not using a design system, you might have repeatable patterns. So we get into a lot of fights over what people don't annotate. We're all still learning. There's a lot of articles out there about how to write text alternatives. I'm not going to cover that here. Like I said, that's an optional topic that we could talk about if you want me to go through some of my alternatives for my diagrams. All right, we talked about this a little bit this morning about using, if you want to make like buttons unique, do you put the unique information into the button label, or do you put it into the description? I recommend putting it into the button label, because when you bring up that NVDA dialog that lists all the buttons on the page, the descriptions aren't included. And so in this scenario, I think it's best. Now you still got to keep the visible text visible. Is that? We'll talk about that in a minute. But our pattern is that we append the thing that makes it unique to the end of it. You want it to be good English, so you separate them with a colon and a space, and I'll give you some examples of why that's important in a minute. But you could do this at a pattern level, right? That anytime you have a card like this, that you always just append the card title of the button. So you might not need to annotate it every single time, because they're all going to follow the same pattern. So on the left, just tell your developer that you want to use either an ARIA label or a hidden screen reader text, and that will mean something to them even if you don't know what that means. Did you have a question? No? Okay. All right, so let's talk about what those labels are. So I have had very energetic content writers that really wanted to write the best possible label. And so they add this product, and when they made it for the screen reader users, they changed it to add truest bright checking. So we now have a problem that the visual text is not part of the label. That's a flat out WCAG failure. This is going to be a problem for speech recognition users. So speech recognition users would say, click add this product. And then it's going to paint numbers on the page, and it'll paint 1 on the first one and 2 on the second one. And then they'll pick, say, like they say something like click 2, and it clicks the second one. So you have to have the visible text. That phrase has to be part of the label, and you really should make it the start of the label. And so everything else we add after. Now, I also had people try and turn it into a nice sentence. So add this product for Truist Fundamental Check. And where it came into now was like, apply now for a Truist checking account. And then on a different page, we had learn more buttons, and I had a developer copy the code and forget to update the screen reader text. So then we had learn more for Truist checking when it should have been learn more about Truist checking. And I just find it easier to use like a colon or a dash or something like that. What you don't want the text to run together. I have a good example of that in a minute. All right, so this is again one, I have a few pages that I get a little more into code. I promise there are not many of them. So here's an example, like I said, of where on the left, the extra uniqueness was added with hidden text or an ARIA label, and on the right, it was added with an ARIA description. And the extra text, when I now go look at the list of link elements, the ARIA description doesn't show up. Again, it's subtle, it's a usability thing, but it's something to think about. For that date formatting, that's good. You don't need the date formatting here, all right? But when you're trying to make those two things unique, so just give this to your developer and show them the stuff on the left, and that should mean something to them. Okay, this is one of my favorite examples. This is from an actual usability test that I was running. We have this card that's designed to help your kids get into banking. And I'm listening to it with a screen reader user, and the screen reader says, help children under the age of 183 learn the importance of saving and budgeting. So why does this happen? Superscript is purely presentational, and none of the screen readers pay attention to it. And it doesn't break those numbers up into separate words, right? So you get 183, and the screen reader reads it out loud as 183. So there are a couple different ways that we can fix this. So one is you can add hidden screen reader text in to turn that 3 into footnote 3. And I would add parentheses or brackets or something around it. Otherwise, you're going to end up with 18 footnote all read together as well. The other way you could fix it is you could make that 3 a hyperlink, which would fix a lot of things. If you let it jump down lower on the page, then user could hit the back button to come back. It would help screen magnifier users and users with cognitive difficulties find that footnote. So that would be really nice. And once you separate that 3 off with a link around it, again, they're not going to run together. Now, you don't have that problem with fees and the 1 because you're mixing letters and numbers. And that always gets read properly. But if I was using my footnotes were A and B instead of 1 and 2, I would have had the same problem with fees and would have read FISA or something like that.
Does it also correctly read symbols, like if you used an asterisk?
I am going to delay on that. I have slides on that later. So we'll talk about, when we get into content writing, we'll talk about what symbols get read correctly and what don't. So, such a good question. I have a slide on that later. Yes?
Out of curiosity's sake, what does the accessibility tree pass to the screen reader? Is it passing the number 183 or passing 18 and 3? What is it passing? Sorry about that.
You're getting a little beyond my depth. My guess is that it's just passing those numbers 183, and they're doing with it. Rob, do you know more?
I was going to say it depends. It comes down to the screen reader using the speech engine, the pronunciation parameters, that sort of thing. It can get a bit hairy.
And this is, I think, my only slide in the deck that actually has code. So for those of you that know code, what you can do is you can also add a non-breaking space in to separate the 18 from the 3. In some of the areas of our design system, we have the non-breaking space built into the component so people don't have to worry about this problem. But that's why I like separating stuff with punctuation, like a colon or a dash, because then you make sure that those words don't run together between the visible text and the hidden text. This is actually something that I don't understand why it's not talked about more in a lot of accessibility documentation, is that hidden text and screen reader text run together. The pronunciation gets crunked up, and if you're a Braille user that's reading it on a Braille reader, it looks weird and embarrassing, right? Like, I want my text to be grammatical when people look at it. Always have a visible field label. This is one of the few exceptions I let you off the hook for the +4. But other than that, always have a visible field label. Okay, so we've been promising get back to repeated blocks and field sets, so we're finally here. So I've got shipping and billing address, and they have, 5 fields that are all the same. And if you look down at the bottom, I guess you do have the checkbox in there, but when you look at the list of form fields, it's pretty hard to tell which is which, and you might not remember which is shipping address and which is billing address. So you need to make these unique. You can add a group label to this. I am pretty sure that that group label is not going to show up in this form field list. If this were a radio button or a checkbox, that would be different. But that group label does not show up in the form field list, which gets back to my annoyance with an assistive technology. That's not, it's not a deal breaker, it's not a WCAG failure. Technically, the field set is handling all of this. But I have a simple fix for this that I stole from the W3C pattern for how you do this on mobile, native mobile, where you don't have the option for a field set. And what I recommend is that you add the uniqueness to the end of the name field, which is the first field in the block. So you make it name for shipping address, name for billing address, and then leave all the others alone. Don't add it to every field. That's just going to be repetitive and freaking annoying, honestly. But add it to the first one, and now it's very clear where each one starts. And when you do this, second native mobile app slide, yes. When you do this on native mobile apps, you don't have group labels in that option. So that's the only way that you can do it, is you can append the name to the field label. And I fixed my last slide to make this, I've got the field labels wrong. It needs to be name for shipping address, because remember, the visible field label always needs to start the assistive technology label for speech recognition users. I fixed the last slide. I forgot to fix this one. All right, so now, and Beth, this will get back to your problem with the mortgage application and page number. So we're going to talk a little bit about focus management and how you handle that. How am I doing? Doing really good on time. All right, so we'll have time to get to this before our break. So here's a simple example of focus management. Now, this is different from what Beth was talking about, where you're going through steps in a mortgage application where there's a new page. This, you're staying on the same page, and you want to make sure that when you submit, if there's a form level error, it goes up to the form. It goes to the form level error. If they're just fields in error, focus moves to the field in error.
Sorry, organizational question. Just for my notes, field labels was 9, and then we jumped to 13.
I completely redid the order of this presentation before this class, and I think that I forgot to fix this. I think I then go back?
10 is later.
Yeah, I think I forgot to fix 13, or I moved it later. Also, I'm in a pattern. Yeah. Sorry about that, but good question. So We've got a standard pattern when there's sort of an error that applies to the whole form and not to a specific field. You move focus. Honestly, what I would probably do is move focus before that and let them down arrow through it. Again, giving users control over what gets read out loud. You might make a case for forcing the announcement on that. Announcements are hard to design and hard to design properly. So that's a dangerous road. If you've got really skilled accessibility people, sure, go that route. But if you've got a more novice team, just put focus right before it, and then as soon as they start to down arrow and read the page, they will get it. All right, but I wanted to talk, focus management is really more of an advanced topic, and I have one example that I'll walk through on a forum. You can ask me a question, but I reserve the right to not to answer.
So on the previous screen, right, where we were talking about the server error, and you said to put the focus before it. So let's say if it's a page level error, so ideally it should go to H1, or where should the focus stay?
You could put the focus on the container for it, and moving the focus to the flat text probably won't have the text read out loud, but then as soon as they down arrow, it will get read.
So how would be the experience? Would be like clicking on submit button, it was just, the focus will go there and stay there and nothing is announced, and the user...
Yeah, you probably should read it and make sure it's announced. Yeah, because hitting the submit button and not hearing anything is a bad experience. Yeah, so I would, both announce it and move focus to it. So that it gets announced and then they hit down arrow and they'd probably hear it again because they're starting from where they are on the form. You could move focus to the page, to the form title, but we generally move it directly to the item. Again, because if it's a field and error, we would move to the field as well. And then when you focus the field, because the error message is attached to it, it automatically gets read when the field is focused. So for the field, it happens automatically because it's part of the field description. And so it's only for that block message where you have to actually announce it. So, can you move the box in the bottom right corner?
You can minimize it.
Oh, please.
The button on the left.
The straight line. Thank you. Okay. So let's talk about this. This was actually part of a fraud reporting. You can actually submit suspects, but this could also work in contact information. I don't know, it's similar patterns where you can add multiple. So let me explain how this actually works, right? So you've got a first name, a last name. In this example, we've already got a second mobile number. You can remove that. You can add a third mobile number. So you can, once you've done that, so if you hit add another mobile in the left column, you get the right column where there are now 3 of them. You've hit the max, and you can remove either 1 or 2. So right off the bat, we've got a couple problems. We've got 3 buttons, we're now in the right column, right? So we have 2 buttons that are labeled remove. We have 2 fields that are labeled mobile, 3 fields that are labeled mobile, actually. So how are we going to handle that?
I would add numbers to it. So like mobile 1 with a ARIA label or some kind of hidden text, mobile 1, mobile 2, or visual as well, and mobile 3, and remove mobile 1, remove mobile 3.
All right, so yes, and we decided that we have space to add the mobile 1, mobile 2 through mobile 3 to the field labels, but not to the remove. So what we ended up doing is we added mobile 1, 2, 3 visually. We left the remove buttons alone and only added the 2 and 3 to the screen reader label. But once you've got the label for mobile 2, it's a little easier to tell and connect them all. All right, So questions now. On the left side, after you click add another mobile, where does focus go? Focus goes to the new field you added. I'm getting nods here. Right. So on the left column, after you do add another mobile, focus goes to mobile number 3, which is the field that you just added on the right. And on the right side, if you remove mobile number 3, where does focus go? I heard somebody say save contact. I heard somebody say mobile number 2. So you want to know that what you did was successful. So I would usually, if you removed it, I would tend to move it upward or to what was added to the page. So I would probably, once I removed mobile 3, put focus back onto add another mobile, because it's sort of the complementary action to removing that field. Save contact wouldn't be bad, right? Because it's moving it down lower on the page. They can't always go back up, but it leaves them wondering a little bit, like, was that successful? So now the hard question is, on the right one, when you remove mobile number 2, where does focus go? So when you remove mobile number 2, it goes back to the design on the left. So you still have mobile number 2, right? So you've got a problem here, because the pattern was when I removed mobile number 3, I can move focus back to mobile number 2. But when I remove mobile number 2, like 3 gets renumbered to 2, and if I move focus to number 2, how do I know that I actually succeeded in my action? Because I removed mobile number 2 and I still have a mobile number 2.
Seems like you'd repeat the behavior and just move it to add another mobile after removing 1.
So you can move it. So the suggestion was to move it to add another mobile. The problem that I keep running into is that you removed 2 and 2 is still there. Now, if you've got them filled with actual phone numbers, you'd be able to tell that I removed this phone number and not that one. But it just still seems weird and confusing that you've removed a field and the field is still there.
Should the remove text instead read clear? If mobile 2 input field remains, it's just removing the information inside of it?
Oh, all right. Completely redesign the form. Nice. No. See, this is good that we don't even have the dynamic problem, because you just can clear each one, right? And you leave them there. And if they fill out 1 and 3, we just save them off as 1 and 2 and don't worry that they left the middle one blank. I like that, because then we don't even have to deal with this problem. Nice. So let me show you what we so this is the easy ones that I've annotated here, right? So add another mobile on the bottom moves focus to mobile 3. When you remove mobile 3, focus goes back to mobile 2. When you remove mobile 2, focus goes back to mobile 1. So that's all the easy stuff. So what we ended up doing for removing mobile 2, we left a placeholder. And what we decided was that while you were in this form, we were never going to renumber the fields. And so we left a place number that mobile 2 has been removed, and if you actually had a number in it, we would tell you what it was. And then you can re-add it. And then if you save it and leave the form, the fact that they're 1, 2, or 3 doesn't really matter. So they would get renumbered if you left the form and came back in. But while you're in the form, we never renumbered them. So that when you removed 2, you got a message that it was removed, and then you could put it back again. This may have been overkill for this form. Putting a clear button would have been a lot simpler. Right. But I think it's a good exercise to think about when you have dynamic page content. When does it make sense to really design out like this beautiful design? And when should you change your design to make it simpler so you don't have to go through all these gymnastics? But again, we didn't even realize this problem until we started annotating out the focus management and what happens. And again, you only need to annotate the focus management when you have this dynamic stuff that gets added or removed to the page. And anytime you have stuff added and removed to the page, this is one of those like warning bells that you need to develop in your head that it's probably time to find your accessibility specialist to consult with you on the pattern, or whoever your dev accessibility SME is, and make sure that you're annotating what you need to and you're not creating a design that's impossible to implement. Okay, so back to the question we had in the back about how does a screen reader read stuff. So symbols will be next. I'm going to start with just abbreviations and plural abbreviations. So as long as it's all uppercase, it gets read as letters. When you mix upper and lowercase, it starts to now treat it as words. So ATM gets read as ATM, but when you make it plural, it suddenly gets read as ATMS. It attempts to pronounce it. That's an easy one for us to change. In our ATM locator, we used to say find ATMs, and now we say find an ATM. Easy fix, we don't have to do anything special to it. If you've got camel case is good because when you add the extra, anytime it hits the capital letter again, it treats it as a new word. That gets pronounced well. Don't run together lowercase. So in the row 3, that gets pronounced open now, but when you make it all lowercase, it gets pronounced openo. That happens the most with URLs, right? Because you've got a lot of words smushed together. And then you start getting into, do you add text alternatives to make it read out loud properly? Lewis is shaking his head no. I'm agreeing with Lewis. Try as much as you can to make the visible text right in what you want to do, but don't replace it with extra hidden screen reader text with screen reader because they're actually used to it sounding weird, and it's going to just confuse them if you put extra stuff in there to try and finagle the pronunciation. Rob, do you want to add color onto that?
So sometimes I do use VoiceOver in my work, and at Metro our abbreviation is MCC. Well, VoiceOver, depending on the speech engine I use, will sometimes read that as 1200. So be sure you know your Roman numerals as well.
But on the other hand, you're now used to your company being 1200, and it happens all the time, right? And so if you do too much of adding extra screen reader text in there, right? So like days of the week, right? Which are just letters. Y'all can look at the letters and understand what a letter means. Don't put the full word in there for screen reader users. I find that kind of offensive of their cognitive abilities, that it's somehow harder for them to tell what a letter is than you are. Like, because anytime you add extra screen reader hidden text, you sometimes create more problems than you solve. And it's just like the no ARIA is, the first rule of ARIA is not to use ARIA, and the same thing goes for trying to jack up your screen reader pronunciations. Okay. All right, so the question that we actually had was on symbols. So I want to talk some about how they're read and some about how you debug how they're read. So for me, the most important thing is, are they read at all? I don't care what word is used, because whether it says for that pound sign, whether it says number, hash, pound, or hashtag, folks are going to be used to their screen reader and what it says, and I would just leave that alone. I just want to make sure that it says something so that folks know that symbol was there. And honestly, anything that you find on a typewriter, and I may be dating myself too much because folks may not know what's on a typewriter, anything that's on your computer keyboard is going to get read properly, and you don't really have to worry about it. And so register gets read fine, the trademark gets read fine. Where you get into trouble, is when you pick weird characters because you like the way they look. So here's an example. I run into a breadcrumb trail. Some breadcrumb trails use a greater than sign. Greater than sign, it's kind of a large angle. I had 10-minute warning. Okay. I had a designer once who used guillemets. It's the French single quote, so they're like an angle bracket, and they liked the way that it looked because they weren't as wide. But for the screen reader user, that gets read as single right pointing angle quotation mark. Yeah, so don't pick random characters from ASCII. I mean, it's the same thing you run into. Our checklist for text messages is like 3 points long. And one of them is just make sure that the emoji that you pick has a good text alternative. Because it's kind of like the parents that let their kids pick the poop emoji Halloween costume for their head, thinking that it was chocolate soft serve. And their kids were going as ice cream. Right? So as long as every so often you're listening to your interface with a screen reader, you'll catch weird stuff like this. So just every so often listen to your page and make sure nothing weird crept in. So same thing like Monday through Friday. I don't care if it says M-F, M-F, M2F, M through F, as long as it says something. If it just says MF, that I start to worry about a little bit. And so what I think about is if I have it in front of me and I'm reading it to someone else, what would I say? So for example, parentheses, right? I don't say parentheses aloud, right? Like I'd say checking if, hidden is bad. But if I were reading something with parentheses aloud, all I would do is pause slightly, right? You don't say commas, you don't say semicolons, don't say periods, right? So those you don't expect to get read out loud. But on these, they're characters that are very important. So 8 to 28 characters, right? So this is picking usernames, picking passwords. Again, I don't care if it says to or dash, but I do want it to say something. That minus 100, dash 100, hyphen 100, and screen readers have gotten a lot better in the last couple of years. Their usability on guessing what word to say based on the context has gotten so much better. So a lot of the time they'll guess more now. But you just, like, if they don't hear that negative sign at all, and they don't know that it's a negative balance instead of a positive balance or a debit versus a credit, that's really bad. My last example on the phone numbers, again, I don't care if they read the parenthesis, but I do want them to read the phone number as digits and not 9,190,500. And that generally gets into semantic markup on the phone numbers, which has been supported since HTML5. What we do for this, I'm afraid this is an area where I have a link that y'all can't access. We have gone through and we have a whole list of test cases that we have tested with NVDA and Chrome, JAWS, and I don't remember if it was Chrome or Firefox, VoiceOver for Mac OS, VoiceOver for iOS, Android for TalkBack. And what we do is we look at that character and how many things read it correctly and how many don't, and then we try and use that to decide if we're going to use it or not. That kind of testing, you need to do it every year or so, but you only need to do it for each character every so often. So we just have one document that all of our platform teams share. And there's some folks that do from DQ, I don't know if they're still with DQ, that do this every so often. You know, what does a screen reader say for a bunch of stuff? I don't know if they've got a session this year. They do it every so often. Where this gets important to me, password rules. So we have password rules with what symbols are allowed in the password. And a lot of those symbols, like parentheses, don't get spoken out loud. You just pause for a moment. right? And so they'll never know that parenthesis is an allowable character as a symbol. There is a screen reader mode that reads it character by character. I would say that's not an advanced skill, but it's maybe an intermediate skill. I don't want to, for something like passwords, I don't want to rely on people to do that. So what we do is we put the whole symbol list and then we add an extra screen reader text, which spelled out is exclamation point, pound sign, percentage, open parenthesis, close parenthesis. We put it at the end so that people that don't need it can skip it and don't have to listen to it, but it's there if people need it because it's just so darn important in that context that we want to make sure it's right. I talked about the emoji problem already. We found some descriptions of this, but these are really old, and especially the DQ one is old. And then, like I said, they've gotten so much better in recent years. Be very careful about looking at old ones. So the Sophie Ragas article may be a better one about how characters are read. But every so often somebody publishes one of these you can rely on. More general writing tips. And writing can be in context, right? So an X in many different locations, like this, we had an initiative to try and provide standard screen reader text for all icons available in our design system, but we did find that some of them were context dependent. And X could be clear, it could be dismiss. If there's text next to it, it could be decorative, because it's really just adding emphasis. So it's kind of hard to create standard text. But for patterns, right, you probably do want to have a pattern for your modals, like you need to close or dismiss or cancel and probably pick one and stick to it. So you'll want to make some kind of writing guidance for screen readers that has some consistency so that every time somebody gets a modal, it sounds the same. At the very least within one application. I don't know if you've got multiple applications that you're responsible for. It'd be nice for them to all harmonize with each other, but you know, I'd love to be a millionaire too. Oops. There, okay. So, important thing, checkboxes never change the visual label. They have their own state, which says whether they're checked or not checked. Rely on the state change, don't change the label. Switches are just like checkboxes. They just look different, but semantically they're identical. So I've got a switch example here. So here it changes between hide password and show password. So what you get for a screen reader user is you get hide password not checked or show password checked. Semantically, those mean the same thing. So you've got a problem. So anytime you have a checkbox, always leave the visible text alone and just rely on the state change. So I've got the second row, we have show password is, because it defaults to to hidden, right? So we've got the checkbox show password and you can just toggle the switch on and off. The other thing you could use, so when we have the button pattern, the button changes the label. It's kind of like the same pattern for play pause, right? While it's playing, you've got a pause button. While it's paused, you have a play button, right? While it's hidden, you have a show password button. When it's shown, you have a hide password button. You can swap out a different button as long as you're not using the pressed state, right? So ARIA has a pressed state. If you added the pressed state, it turns your button into a switch or a checkbox, and then you're back to the same problem. You would have a show password button, and it would either be pressed or unpressed. So be careful about when you change the visible label and when you don't. Now, we talked a little bit about ARIA and what it handles. So these things like pressed, not pressed, expanded, collapsed, We talked about selected. Remember in the dots for the carousel, which one was currently showing, and there's ARIA. I don't have a good answer for you on all the ARIA that you need to know as a designer. I've put a bunch of examples into this presentation of the most basic ones. But it's something that you're gonna need to learn over time as you get more advanced. And one way that will help with this, especially for your own designs, is what you'll want to do is once they're implemented, listen to them and listen to what happens when you open and close them or press and unpress. And if they're double labeled, you've put too much text in there. And that's where it gets into whether your developer has user empathy or not and is aware of this or not, because I'll see a lot of developers add the expanded collapse text that the designer put in their designs and the ARIA, and now you get it double labeled and it's really annoying. So every so often, listen to your interface with a screen reader and make sure stuff isn't double labeled. All right, we've been going for an hour and a half. Time for a break. So come back at 2:40 and we'll dig into the last section. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started again. I've got a handful of more slides that are part of my core set of slides that I'm going to go through. And then when I get through these, we'll switch to, I've got a bunch of topics that I'll let y'all pick. Mostly because whichever one we talk about first, we'll talk about in most depth. And I'd like to give you guys a little control over what we're doing. But I'm going to keep going through content writing. And this kind of, I touched on this earlier about what's the label for that chevron. And that depends on the context, right? So it depends on, is the whole row clickable? Or in scenario 2, just the text label and the chevron. And in scenario 3, which I don't think people would usually do, but I just put up there for comparison, right? So you've got two problems. One is making sure that the left column and the right column don't run together, right? So otherwise you get protection none, sounds a little weird, but coverage on sounds really weird when coverage and on run together as a single word. So in scenario 1 and 3, you need to worry about the left and the right column running together. And again, my go-to is like a colon or a dash. So anytime that you have a 2-column layout that's not a proper table, how do you know if it's a proper table? Usually because there's row headers and there are column headers. And if you see stuff laid out in columns, but there's not a row header, a column header, it's probably just pretty divs, and you need to make sure the left and the right don't run together. Now, if it's text and a number, it's not a problem, but where it's text and text like this. So in 1 and 3, you have to add the colon in between protection and between the text on the left and on. Then you have to make sure that those chevrons get labeled. In the first scenario, where they're together with overdraft coverage and on, all you have to do is add an edit to them because they've already got their full label from the visible text. If the clickable area, as it gets smaller, you have to add more text to the chevron. So in scenarios 2 and 3, because the link doesn't incorporate the text on the left, you now have to add to that chevron edit overdraft protection, edit overdraft coverage. And this gets back to, again, when I was talking to my content strategists and I was trying to help them write this, you have to know how your website or app works so that you can write proper text for it. This gets into a truest rule and something that I have created, but this is not, I'd have a hard time finding a WCAG violation on this. We limit the labels of interactive elements. We try to keep them to no more than 15 words, and we really don't want you to do it more than 25. When you're reading text on a page with a screen reader, it naturally breaks it up into chunks. How big the chunks are depends on your personal settings. Some people like longer chunks, some like shorter chunks. It depends on your age, your reading speed, your cognitive load, how tired you are that day. Well, no, that's not a setting people change a lot. Not like speed, reading speed. Anyway, but interactive elements, the whole thing gets read all at one chunk. I reviewed a design last year where there was a button where the label was 300 words long. Like these things, I don't know what that developer was thinking. I really don't understand. But, so it comes into here, if only build a budget is clickable, you're fine. But as soon as the design team says, oh, well, let's take the button off and let's make it a clickable button. So we've got a couple problems here. One, this button now becomes too long because you're hearing all 33 of those words read together all at once without any possibility to pause. You can reread it as many times as you like. It's not a WCAG failure, but if I were going to turn this into a clickable button, I would tell them to write it to be shorter. The other thing that happens in interactive labels don't honor semantic markup. You don't get headings, you don't get bullet lists, so none of that, it's just plain text. So any kind of structure to it, I've had this happen, it actually happens with all kinds of ARIA stuff. Imagine that you've got a field and you've got hint text below, you can't make that hint text to be bullets, because the bullets in the hint text will get ignored and all three of your bullets will just get run together as text. So anytime that you're adding extra ARIA labels to stuff, they have to be fully punctuated out, and you can't rely on stuff like the heading separating from the text. So like here, guide to budgeting would need punctuate. If this were to be turned into a card, you'd have to add punctuation after guide to budgeting before mindful.
I was just going to say, as somebody that audits sites, if that entire button was interactive and the label, I would flag that under the meaningful link if it's a link. Like that, that it's overly verbose and that it's not a meaningful link. And so it loses some meaning when it's too much. And I would also flag it for speech input users because they might have difficulty being able to activate the button when there's so much text as the button name. So those were just a couple thoughts that I had if you want to throw WCAG at it.
Yeah.
And then also we advise a lot of times to do like the pseudo CSS stretched links. Do you know anything about that for like making that button a link with CSS but not linking the whole button with an A element? Anyway.
And so you can play games like that.
Yeah.
So for instance, you can make the whole thing clickable for a mouse, but for a keyboard user, leave the call to action button there, and the keyboard user clicks on the button.
Yeah.
That's a great way to do it. I'm very happy to have the extra clickable area as long as there's an equally workable keyboard area for people that can't click. Yep. This is a real thing that I ran into. I really don't understand the CSS that made this work, but we had a progress bar that looked like 16%, and for the screen reader user, it read 16.66664%. Every so often, you have to listen to your website because weird stuff sneaks into there. Here's another example for bullets. These bullets with the checklists are cute, but they don't actually, it's just kind of decoration and they're not really meaningful. So we actually semantically want this to be a 3-list bullet of the 3 features for this account. So I would mark it up as bullets with my bullet annotations and then mark that icon as decorative. and that I don't want it to read checked, choose up to any 3 bank accounts, checked, minimum $100 transfer per account. This is another one. Again, the password rules, this is a really complicated, but I'm just going to talk about just the checking and the unchecking. And so we gave a pattern to this. The text that we use is rule met or rule not met. And they toggle as you're typing in, they toggle. You do need to make sure that only the rule that toggles gets read out loud instead of the whole thing. This gets into advanced stuff for live ARIA, but I learned this trick from the unconference at the end of Access U last year. That ARIA live session was like one of the best things I attended the whole week. But anyway, don't throw your ARIA live on the visible text. Always make a separate ARIA live region that is specifically for what you want announced. And when you want something announced, put it into that region. Because if you just throw an ARIA live around this, and every time something gets checked or unchecked, the whole thing gets reread, like it's a mess. There's no good way to design those live region announcements when you're relying on the visible text. All right, so tables and responsive layouts. When you get down to a certain point, like for us, you've got a big table, but then when you throw it into a side sheet, maybe, like this is details for transactions in our bank accounts, and this is what comes up on the side sheet. Is this a table? This is not a table, because this column doesn't have a header, and this column doesn't have a header, right? So this is not a table, this is a bulleted list. So there are 2 things that you need to worry about. One, you need to worry about type and credit running together. So you need to separate all of these with colons. And the other thing is that you probably need to annotate this, that this is a bulleted list and not a table, so it doesn't get implemented as a table. Now, if you've got good accessibility developers, they should, if you don't have headers for your columns, they shouldn't make a table, but you never know. So here's an example. This is 6 or so years ago now. Back when, anyway, so what the design was at the top. So we had 3 different dates and amounts. What was implemented was a table with 6 cells that were all data cells. So we went back to our developers and said, no, you can't make it a table. It's not really a table. It needs to be a bulleted list. They came back with a bulleted list that had 6 items in it. And they made each individual cell a bullet. Like they just took the table cells and restyled them as bullets. And we're like, no. It needs to be 3 bullets, 1 for each row. And so that, again, that gets back into who you're working with and who's around. But if I'd had annotations on that, you could annotate each row and group it together to note that I want 3 bullets and not 6. Here's another example. This is from our Zelle where you can send payments. I think that whole thing works as one sentence. Send $200 to Jamie Frazier, jamie@email.com from checking 34222. So I might annotate that I want that all as one sentence and not to be read in individual parts. As a designer, you might make a different decision and you might break that up into more, but you as a designer should be making that decision and annotating it out and not letting the developers decide how they want to break that up and have it read just by how their code falls. Same thing for mobile apps. Again, as you swipe through the page in a mobile app, you go through all the static content and you can decide by how it's grouped how many individual swipe stops there are and what gets read together and what gets read individually. I don't have specific guidelines for you, but just you need to make that decision and mark it in your designs. Auto-playing content, this is here as a check. I've got better articles on that. I'm not talking about things where I found good articles. Finally, Kyle is deaf. I work for a bank. We don't do a lot of multimedia that includes audio. So I have this at the end because this really doesn't come up very often for us. Kyle's primary language is American Sign Language. Relies heavily on captions and transcripts. But anytime, again, you've got audio synced with the video, captions are better than transcripts because you lose that live. And that's another thing. I have a lot in banking. We have a lot of like videos on our website where we like walk through using the mobile app. That has no real-time meaning to it. So an article next to it is fine because you're getting the same information in a text form. But it's really where you've got the audio and the video going together and you want that real-time experience. There are a lot of examples out there that kind of get you started. What I want to talk about is people tend to forget about the visuals. They tend to forget about people that are blind or low vision, right? And so here you've got on-screen text, Tony, who's a Truist small business specialist, and Fernando, who's a Truist client. The best way to deal with that is make sure that you say that out loud in the audio sometimes. But there are styles of making videos where you never have a narrator and they want to rely only on people saying their own stuff, and then they put up on the screen what's going on. And then that means that somebody that can't see the video never knows what's happening. I used to have a colleague who was blind, and we were in a company meeting once where they played a commercial that was airing on TV. And my colleague who was blind said, "Oh my goodness, I've been hearing this commercial for years. I didn't know it was for my company because they never said the company name out loud." It was only on screen, right? So don't forget about your users relying on that can't see the video when you're dealing with it, when you're writing. So what is nice that we've started using, well, okay, so here's another example. This is more of an infographic style that's animated instead of something that was recorded with people. And the text here, we believe everyone should have access to the tools and resources that help build generational wealth. But there's a lot more going on in those pictures than there is in that text, right? So I would add a little extra text that says, like advisors, networking groups, and training. And now the visuals and the audio match, and you don't have to do anything to add extra audio descriptions to what's there. Audio descriptions take up a lot of room, and they add a lot of time to the video. When you get them in something like a movie, like go home to your favorite streaming service, especially Netflix, because they had a huge lawsuit and they have a lot more audio descriptions now. When you're watching a movie or TV show, it's really important that you stay in real time. The audio descriptions are really short because they have to keep the pacing going on the TV show or the movie. I have videos about banking. I'm not sure that the pacing really matters that much. What's more important is that I'm thoroughly describing what's going on. So we've started using Able Player, which is, I believe, University of Washington developed it. And in the same way that you can have a caption file that's time-stamped to the video, you can have an audio description file that's time-stamped to the video. And it will use speech synthesis to read the audio descriptions out loud. And if they take too long, it pauses the video until it's done reading the audio description, then it keeps going. And it's really nice because creating these caption files and the audio description files is really easy. We briefly played around with recording audio, like remixing the video to make a longer version and having a voice actor do the audio tracks, and it was so expensive. I do not recommend going there unless you have a really strong reason. So Able Player, excellent, excellent little tool. Graphics and infographics. If you want to learn about that, I'm sorry, Doug Sheepers has been talking about this all day somewhere else in this building. That's a really long, advanced topic about how do you write text. I'm going to just touch on it at the very briefly, which is just that having visible text is better so that you don't have to deal with the non-text contrast. Make it an SVG and give it the right semantic titles and labels to it, rather than having images of text. If it gets really complicated, just put a visible paragraph on the screen that everyone can read and integrate it into the page. Don't just write a description for screen reader users, because for some reason, as soon as it's visible on the page, people do a better job with the text than when it's screen reader only. I hate to say that, but it's true. But I have a lot of resources here. Half of them are from Doug Sheepers and high charts. Just use high charts. High charts graphs are so accessible and awesome. They've done a really good job, and they also have, if you want to build your own, go look at what they've done and borrow their code, because it's really good. All right, this is actually the end of my usability checklist. And the last thing that I want to note, a lot of you are designers and use Macintoshes. Macintoshes are expensive, and until a few years ago, their screen reader really was bad. It's gotten better. Also, Macs have more limited software. So out of people that respondents without disabilities are 3 times more likely to use a Mac than a respondent with disabilities. So if you only have time to test for one thing, test with NVDA and Chrome on a PC. And if all you have is a Mac, get yourself a virtual desktop and learn how to use NVDA inside your virtual desktop. If you don't have the right keys on your keyboard, Windows has an on-screen keyboard that will give you access to Control and Alt and the special things that you need. And the on-screen keyboard is nice for teaching classes and demos, because people, when you're doing screen share, people can see what you're typing. So use VoiceOver. Like if you're in the middle of editing your code and you're trying to get it right, use VoiceOver for short-term debugging. But if you're doing like pre-production QA testing prior to approval for release, it's got to be NVDA and Chrome. Why don't we use JAWS? JAWS is a really good screen reader. JAWS is really smart. If the page is broken, JAWS will fix it, which makes JAWS really bad for QA testing, because it fixes all of your problems, and you'll never know that they were there. So use NVDA for your testing. If you're designing a component that everyone is using, we test with everything, and we test it really, really thoroughly. But for random pages, we can't do that much. All right. So, excellent. I've got about an hour left. And what I have done, I want you all to tell me what you would like to listen to next. So I've got a Slido. You could type the bit.ly in, or you can scan the QR code. And I would like y'all to vote on what we should talk about next. I can't remember. I think I let you click on more than one item. So try, let's say, check like 2 things that you want to talk about. And if you don't have the QR code, you could type the bit.ly into your computer, and that, after that E, that's a lowercase l. If somebody have it open, is it actually letting you vote, or do I need to launch it? Okay. I think Franklin Barbecue I liked. It had good, we'll start with that one. And for those of you that aren't local and don't know about this, these are some of the recently hot barbecue joints that did not exist when I lived here a long time ago. And I think somebody left one of them to start the other one, so there's like this big rivalry between the two of them. All right, so let's go through our visual design checklist. So what on here does and doesn't pass contrast checks, and what needs to pass contrast checks?
Probably, sorry, I don't have a microphone, but.
Thinking order in advance doesn't look, just to my eye, but as far as contrast.
So my eye says for order in advance. So remember, there's the 3-to-1 for non-text content, although, again, the truest way, or the Miranda way, is that if it's thick, that can be 3-to-1. If it's thin, it needs to be more. That button against the page background is going to be 3-to-1. I bet the button passes, but the white text on the orange background does not.
That's what I meant.
Exactly. But that's why I want to say it, because you need to be looking at the non-text content as well. Because now, because if you couldn't see that, well, if you couldn't see that orange, you wouldn't be able to see the white either. Because if you were in high contrast mode and that orange went light, like you would never know that that was there. Do you think their logo passes? So that's how they've gotten themselves into this problem, actually, is that their logo passes, and so they've got the blue on the black passes and the orange on the black passes, but they're using those colors. Let me actually go lower on the page, and I'll show you. So let's look at this, right? So they've got a limited color palette for the brand, but they're now using the white on both black and orange and on blue. So this is where we get back to that 8-shaped grid I talked about early this morning, that you need to be knowing all of these contrast pairs. And so somebody made them the nice logo, but they need a more extensive color palette for their brand. And in particular, for black, they have 2 contrasting colors, which is the white and the orange. But for white, the only contrasting color they have in their brand palette is black. So they've got a problem with what they can do. Those July and August, that gray against white doesn't pass contrast checks. The orange against white doesn't pass. The blue and the orange don't pass. So that blue buy now. Now, for that card for Franklin, I'm not sure that I care that the blue on the card against the orange in the background passes contrast checks. I think the text is what's important. The fact that blue and white makes me want to cry. But the fact that the July is gray and the 3 through 6 is orange, that difference between those I don't think matters. If they were the same color, the page would be just as understandable. Now you need to darken the July to get it to pass contrast checks. The other problem they're going to run into, so we've got one of our brands has orange in it, and I've worked with this some, right? So if you get that orange and you darken it enough that it passes contrast checks, it turns into more of a burnt orange and less bright. And so you have to decide, are you willing to live with the burnt orange in your brand palette, or do you just pick a different color?
Was it a gradient on the orange, or is that just my eyes? Like, does it get darker to the right side?
I think it's just your eyes.
Okay.
I think that's just starting to like glow and jump off the page.
Is there a shadow on that blue text up there?
Oh, shadow on the blue text.
Or
Yeah.
just that it looks so glowy and fuzzy?
So, for instance, on this, there's so much white space around it, I don't think those boxes need to pass contrast check. So that blue on the white text, if we got that dark enough that you could read it, I don't care that the white against the cream doesn't pass contrast. I think that doesn't provide any information. But now we go into a white band, and they've got white on black, but they've now got the white on orange, right? So they've got too limited of a color palette. Let's go and open, all right, so home is currently selected. That blue thing indicating that home is selected, that doesn't pass contrast checks. It's nice and chunky, so it only needs to be 3-to-1 in Miranda rules. But that's probably more like 2-to-1. Let's actually look at some of these flyout or the menu.
I want to know why serving the best barbecues in quotation marks.
So the joke was that he wants to know why serving the best barbecues in quotation marks. I mean, that goes back to a very old style of when you didn't have when you were doing stuff with typewriters, quotes was actually the cheap way of doing bold. And so, like, my grandparents would use quotes. I love you. It's a generational thing. Question in the back.
Thanks. So I know you said that the logo passes for color, but my first thing was how small it is. Does it pass for size? Like the text gets so tiny up at the top left.
WCAG has no size limits. It makes me so sad. I think that you're right. And when you look at it on your mobile device, it's much bigger and it works better. So there's something weird going on with their responsive layout that at the desktop layout, it doesn't work. Let me see if I zoom in. Like if I zoom in, right, like that's starting to look a lot more reasonable. And that will also help. So let's talk about the 26 and the 6 per link. The fact that the one's black and the other's gray. I'm okay. The black to gray should pass, since you're only using color to convey information, it really needs to be strong. And even then, like for a screen reader user, I'm not too worried for sighted users relying on vision with impaired vision about having the 26 and the 6 run together because it's a lot smaller, it's in italics. But I would be worried for screen reader users that you're going to end up with the jalapeno cheddar sausage costing $266, which is the 183 or younger problem. So you do probably need to put parentheses for screen reader users around that 6 per link to make sure they stay separated.
You could actually just put a colon and make the color of the colon the same color as the background.
You could put a colon in there, yes. And you could either have the colon hidden for just screen reader users. You could put the colon in there and make it maybe the same gray as the 6 per link, as long as you darken that a little to pass contrast checks. Mm-hmm. So, another person over here.
I know we didn't get to talk about typography too much, but I would also argue that the use of all caps across the site makes it really difficult to scan the page. Mm-hmm. Rather, if they were to use like a sentence cap, it might be easier to distinguish letters between one another.
And do millennials know how to read script?
I was going to say
script.
So I was going to add for the 6 per link, one way for me to visually separate it would be to put like parentheses on either side.
Mm-hmm.
It would also break up the reading for screen reader users.
Right. So maybe best to just do it visually as well, because they're kind of squashed together, right? Like they're kind of tight.
I just want to hear it.
I'll just say Gen X is just too lazy to read it. So.
Yeah. So here's another area where you're going to have to worry about salad and single running together, slaw and pint, beans and quart, because this is not a table. They don't have column headers, right? So this is probably just 3 list items, and that's what's in there. So visually, it's separated into 3 columns, but that's probably just some random divs added there that semantically have no meaning. So you need to add something on here to make sure that that stays separated out.
So just as a question for everybody else, when they don't have a 0 in their sense, like 7.4 on one of them.
Did they really?
Under slaw. Does that bother anybody else? Because that isn't money to me. 7.4 is not a typo.
I think it's a typo. Yeah.
That's the Richter
They
scale.
got it on the 50s, but not on the 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right, so now we've got their shop, right? So here, this is the problem of the text on top of the background images, totally unreadable. But if you added like a 50% gray background to make it readable, all of your merchandise would look boring. So I think that they're trying to conserve space, but that this maybe was not the best visual layout, and you should pull the text off of the pictures.
If you mouse over and make it darker, can you mouse over?
Question was, can I mouse over them? Let me do that while.
I was just, if they just didn't center the text, like they don't have to have it right on top of everything. They have lots of space they're not using.
Right.
Well,
So
wait, if you mouse over, can you tab to it, see if it works with focus?
contrast does not improve
Okay,
when you
so
tab to it.
They failed to do keyboard.
But it doesn't, even though the contrast may pass when it hovers, that's not WCAG compliant. It has to pass in the non-hover state. But I liked the suggestion, so maybe you don't make the whole image darker, right? But you put the text up at the top, and maybe you put a gradient so the top of the image is darker to guarantee you've got the contrast, and then the bottom of the image is full vibrancy to make your stuff pop. But they did have, that was nice, so they did have all of their focus highlights. I see your hand, give me one moment. So WCAG 2.2 gets into some complicated, I'm not going to diagnose this, I'm going to say this is a good learning opportunity to learn about the WCAG 2.2 rules about how much of the boundary needs to be there. I leave that as an exercise for the reader. Yes?
So you said it has to, so when you hover over it, it gets darker and it passes. So if you flipped it, would it be okay? So if when you open up the page and it's dark and then you hover over it and it gets light, is that okay since the regular plain state passes contrast?
It has to pass in all states.
All states, okay.
Yeah, because if you're really zoomed into the page, you may not be able to get your mouse out of the way to unhover it, right? So screen magnifier users may, like they're always going to be hovering on stuff. So, yeah.
What if you use the font outline, opaque font outline behind the font?
Yeah, so let's go back. So they used that, they had that on so the outline here, like the We Ship on Goldbelly. It works on the Goldbelly because it's super thick and chunky. But if it's just fine lines, like a shadow on the text, like it technically passes WCAG, but in practice, it's still really hard to read. I think it's a weak technique unless it's super, super big and chunky like this is. And that gets back again to my personal guideline about the thick versus thin. If it's thick, maybe it helps, but if it's thin, it just makes the page busier, you know? So the clock and the map, decorative or not?
Oh, decorative.
I had several votes for decorative. Anyone voting to give a text alternative to the clock and the map? Yeah. No. Yeah, and so this, I'm sorry?
It has an alt tag that says clock.
It has an alt tag that says clock.
Yeah.
Right.
Decorative image.
Which
It's not awesome,
I'd have a hard time throwing a violation on that one. It's not a great design, but it's also not technically wrong. All right, let's do one more page here and then we can switch to, oh, look, they have links embedded in text that don't have underlines, and I bet that blue on the white doesn't pass contrast checks. So now this is nice. So you can make Aaron Franklin a heading, and it's before the article. So this actually works well. It doesn't have the eyebrow text problem, right? So Aaron can be a heading. Stacy can be a heading. That's very nice. So you've got Meet Aaron and Stacy Franklin up here, right? So maybe that's your H1, Aaron is your H2, Stacy's your H2. Uptown Sports Club is now, are you now getting into one of these weird and rare cases where you're going to have multiple H1s on the page because they've thrown a bunch of stuff together that doesn't really fit? Like, this is about, so I think this is just a usability problem that they've got a page called About that has a lot of info on it because they're running out of main menu items. All right, so let's compare this now to Terry Black, thank you.
Tap down.
Yeah. So all of that white text at the top getting lost in the sky. Now that white on the windows, of course, passes, but on the white might or might not pass. It probably doesn't, but I bet it's going to be borderline, and I'm going to get into a big fight because they're like, oh, it's 4-1, can I just go with it? That red in the nationwide shipping definitely does not pass.
And also for colorblind users, that would be very difficult.
All right, so for colorblind users, yeah. And so, but it does have the underline, right? So you know that it's clickable even if you can't distinguish the color. All of the white at the bottom, like they're trying to get people to click on their social media links, but none of that passes. So, all right. So the flyout, so I think maybe, let's imagine that merch and gift cards passes against that cream, right? But the cream doesn't pass. Does that cream box need to pass against the back of the page? No. You've opened the flyout. Does that card add any? I've got a no here. I've got a no there. Does anyone want to speak in favor and make the case that that box for the flyout needs to pass contrast against the page background? Which is too bad because they've added a nice shadow to it that makes it work. Right? Darn it.
Never do that because you can't even see the shop.
Or the arrow next to shop.
Yeah. All right, so let's go to their merchandise page.
It also flies out on mouse over, so if you were using a magnifying.
Oh, yeah, we didn't check to see.
It's on hover.
Oh, okay, so none of these, oh, look at that. None of that is keyboard focusable. Yeah, well, then we get down at the bottom. And then it goes back up to the top. And weirdly, that one has a red underline. And yeah, so let's see if I can expand that. No enter, no space, so I can't expand that. I can't do anything with this with just a keyboard. But again, that's a dev problem, not a design problem, so not our fault. So look at that. So here now, right, we've got one problem solved and one problem created, right? So the problem solved, you don't have the text on top of the picture. The problem created is that the picture is now before the text. So you've now got the same, it's not the eyebrow text problem anymore, but if try us on is your header, you've now got the picture before the heading. Darn it, I said header, and then I said heading. Oh, so hard. Right, so I don't think there's anything wrong with the hover on the mouse hover. It just, where it really changes, that's going to be a nightmare because now suddenly you've got a picture of all that text, right? And it's a hard WCAG failure. Technically, all of that information, it's text inside an image and you need the text alternative. What I would do is I would go through to the product page and I think I would give it a pass on the home page as long as this picture has all the ingredient information in it as the text alternative for it.
It has all the ingredients on the product detail and text right there.
Yeah, but there's a lot more in there, right? It's got the nutritional info. Yeah. So that gets into conforming alternate versions, right? And so the page before this, it had an image with text in it, but you had a path to get to the page with the same information, assuming that this has the right text alternative. And so I'm going to give it a pass on the previous page because it's very close and easy to get to it on the second page. And that's not a fight I'm going to fight. Yeah.
Where are we on character limits in alt text descriptions? Is that, I know I've read it, but then, you know, if you want to describe all of that.
So that gets back, so the alt text limits, well, that gets back into the fact, so that's my question. So for interactive elements, right, I had this rule about definitely don't make it more than 25, try not for more than 15. When you read an alt text for an image, does a screen reader pause every so often, or does it read it all as one blob?
All as one blob.
Probably all as one blob. So you probably want to keep it short. And so you probably want, like, a lot of shopping websites for food stuff will have the like if you go to like CVS or Walgreens and they've got a lot of stuff there with information on it, they have an expansion below that has it all as text on the page. So yeah, they're probably going to run into trouble with this. So what, maybe they should have they've got ingredients here and maybe then an expansion with the nutritional information. I think if they then had the nutritional info here, I would be slightly less concerned about having all of it as the alternate for that image if it's also on the page. So this one, unlike the carousel, look, so that's each one of these, they've got the picture and the text as one. And so that's going to make it a lot easier to design because you could just use the visible text as the label and not have to have the two separate links. Lewis, we got a question in the back.
I have a question about links. As a designer, I hate underlined links. So is there an alternative, especially like if I shaded the whole background? Is it just about the contrast level, or is it that it has to be underlined?
You can't use color alone to indicate that something is interactive. Underline is the easiest way. You could use a shaded box around it, but then that shading against the page background needs to pass 3:1. So you've now turned an underline and added a solid, like you're basically adding a button in the middle of your text. I know that you hate the underlined text. I gotta say, I think it's something you need to get over, and that it's something that you learned in design school, and you're gonna die a little inside every time, but it's for a good cause. But you could technically, yes, use shading, but again, I think it does technically pass if it's got the color indicated, and then when the focus highlights, WebAIM does this. Let's go look at them, right? And I'm not sure that I agree with their approach, but it does.
While that's
You can't use weight as the alternative?
Bold.
No, you can't.
Bolding to distinguish inline link from.
If it's the only thing you're using, no.
Oh, I thought bold, as long as the contrast is 3:1 against the text that it's within.
But how do you differentiate, when you're colorblind, how do you differentiate between bold for indicating it's bold text versus a link? I had a colleague not be able
Lewis,
to.
can you use the microphone?
I had a colleague who was colorblind who wasn't able to complete an assignment because all they did was bold and color, and he didn't know those were links to half of his assignment. So
That's a good
it,
point.
it fails.
I think
And then-
technically it passes like WCAG, but
I don't,
the bolding.
I don't think so.
Okay,
No.
okay.
No, because bold means more than, doesn't necessarily mean link. Underline can be used for something else, but it is tied to links on web pages.
And you might have a custom style sheet that's on your computer that substitutes another font, and you can't guarantee that their other font supports bold.
Right.
The other thing is that also, as you zoom in and out, like the difference between bold and not bold at like 12 point, like you may not be able to tell if you've got it zoomed into 400%. Like by the time they're all that big, bold and not bold look the same. So it kind of disappears. Louis, you got a customer back. Can you wait until the microphone gets you?
I hate underlines too, and then I found the underline offset tag in CSS. You can offset it a little bit more so that like your descenders don't run into the underline or go through it, and it makes it look a lot better.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it makes it more legible, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Maybe I've seen that before and never really noticed, but could you kind of describe what that would look like?
Yeah, well, there are two parts of it. I'm actually going to zoom in on, so one technique is what WebAIM has done, where they make the underlines have a little bit of white space around the descenders. The other technique is you can actually pull that underline low enough that it skips the descenders entirely, and so you have a solid line. I think one of my typography articles has an example of that. Probably I think the Adrian Oselli one. No, my computer. And Adrian is also usually wandering around here. No, he just has the gap. Oh, look at that. When he rolls over, they get, but that yellow doesn't pass. Yeah, I can't come up with I can't come up with an example off the top of my head.
So wait, what about Google though? Because none of those are underlined.
Google doesn't always make stuff that's accessible.
Are you implying that Google actually is compliant?
I'm sorry, so like Google,
So from a day-to-day perspective, though, I would assume people are using Google a lot because most people use Google a lot. What is the accessible solution? Like, how are they still working around it? Are they?
So-
Money that they can
No, not Google. I'm saying about people using it. Is it because it works with tabbing, or like how is it working for accessible people, or is the answer is that it's not?
It's also the layout of this page. You know, when
so it's a consistent layout, and it's been broken for so long that people just know, and like that's how search results work, that they're all clickable. And it does have the hover effect, right? So they probably think that they're okay because it's on hover. Or they're just not up to WCAG 2.2 and they're so big that no one can tell them to do otherwise.
So
And-
I had a question.
Yeah.
So if it's like this, but you had a caret at the end of it, kind of like a button caret or something, would that make it pass? Or like-
Nice. So add an icon to make it look, add a click me
Right,
icon
like
to
the
add
spawn-
the cognitive affordance in.
Right, spawn
Gold
a new
star.
window, that other icon that people use too.
Mm-hmm. It would bring it back to the 90s to add that at the end of every line, but I'm old enough that I'm okay with that.
I just want to follow up on the underline thing there for a brief second because I remember having to deal with this earlier. Yeah, I agree. I think best practice is keep using underline, but the official policy according to WCAG is the link text has to have a 3:1 color contrast ratio to the surrounding text. But I 100% agree that the link underline is the way to go.
Yeah, we don't allow that for us.
Yeah. We flag those advisory and audits, like, okay, you don't have to do this, but.
So the other problem that you run into with the 3:1 contrast ratio The other reason, in practice, it's an impossible thing to satisfy. So what you need to have is you need to have your text, your link text, and your background all to be mutually contrasting with each other. If you've ever actually tried to do this, once you get your foreground and your background and you've picked that interior color, you've got about this much room to get something that contrasts with both the dark color and the light color. And in order to be able to do that, you have to pull your foreground and your background colors so far apart that you end up with having to have like a 14:1 contrast ratio between your text and your background so that you've got room between them for the 3:1 contrast ratio of your links. So it's something that it's there on the books, but if you've ever tried to implement it, it's almost impossible. Yeah.
Back to websites that are all black and white.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can do it.
Yes. And then our designers would just lay down and cry. Right.
I got a quick question.
Not a quick one, I have to get over to you.
Thanks. Now, that's only for body content, is that correct? We don't have to do that on footers or headers?
Right. So that is for text that's embedded in the middle of sentences. It's also, though, when you have some text that's links and some text that's not. So some folks, like I have seen footers like this, where at the bottom you've got those bullet lists and some of them are linked and some of them aren't. Right? And so it depends a little bit. Generally, I give things a pass in the header and the footer because everybody knows that everything in there. But if you have a mix of linked and unlinked stuff, then you come back to either having to have the underline or a cognitive affordance through some kind of icon.
Okay, so it just has to be consistent.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so now the player is interesting. You do need, like, probably the website owner has picked this as their player. And because you've picked it and not left it at the browser default, it's your responsibility to make sure that your browser plugin, that the plugin that you've chosen is also accessible. Now, Vimeo does a pretty good job with this. You do have to watch out if you've styled it with your own CSS that you don't break their accessibility, right? But this is all, now granted, when I hover over this, I don't know when that probably still passes contrast checks. Do these hovers need to pass contrast checks? Do these hover effects? I don't think they do. It's a nice to have. But you're not required to have a hover effect to let people know that the mouse is in the right place. Usually, it's a little, so like here, you could see changes between the pointer and the hand. That's generally, now you can't tell which one you're over, but I don't think that hover effect is required. It's a nice to have, so I don't think that the fact that hover effect and the one that's hovered versus not hovered doesn't need to have a 3:1 contrast ratio difference. Now, if you use, where you get into trouble with that, again, is on keyboard focus, whichever one of those has the keyboard focus. Let's see if it'd help if I hit tab instead of shift. Is this? All right, so I was in settings. Right, and so on focus, they just have the outline, and that's great for the keyboard. So, we're got almost all our time left. So probably don't have enough time to formally vote again, but we could sneak one more topic in. I've now gotten logged out on my Slido. So, let's see. All right, so the main topics, we could do a similar breakdown like this on Smashing Magazine and Boxes and Arrows. I could talk about writing text alternatives in PowerPoint, or I could get into audio descriptions and talk about what we did to write the audio descriptions of our Super Bowl ad. So we could keep dishing on Boxes and Arrows versus Smashing Magazine. Has made some interesting design choices that make them different. That usually ends up being a good, and you know, I picked out this example like 4 or 5 years ago, and they haven't redesigned it. I also am surprised that I don't get hate mail. That they don't come. All right, so let's look. All right, so here's typical page on Smashing Magazine. So we've got the eyebrow text problem, right? So you've got the heading, and then you've got the author and their profile image before that, right? So the article title looks like it should be the heading, but the author's not. Now, granted, they've got it short enough that maybe you could wrap the heading around the author and the article title and not deal with the problem. And then they've got continue reading with this really interesting icon. So I don't think that would have to be underlined because you do have the icon next to it. So let's go into like a topic, right? So what's the H1 on this page? UX, right? So this is, we're in UX, you've got this category here, but you've got all this stuff above it, right? So probably UX is the H1, and then I don't know if you might need a hidden heading for the extra set of filters, and then another heading for all the articles below. It's not that much text. So I do add hidden headings too much. I know it's a weakness of mine. But so these aren't that bad. So let's compare this now to Boxes and Arrows, which is where this gets really interesting. So for those of you aren't familiar, Boxes, these are both sort of websites that do a lot of designy kind of articles. So let's get into their posts. Okay. So, did y'all know that all of this is clickable? That date's clickable, from the editors is clickable. So you've got all kinds of stuff like, let me go to Amy and the list of articles by her. Yeah. So the orange and white doesn't pass contrast checks. You need the underline under Amy here. And then you've got the same problem that each of these articles, hiatus indefinitely, is where the logical heading goes, but you've now got the image and the date and the from and the editors before it. Like, how are you going to organize that so that if you're jumping by headings, you don't miss the information above it? Now, I will say on this site, so we had the UNC Music example earlier. If you don't know what day and time that event is, that's really bad. I gotta say on this site, while it's a problem that jumping to the heading hiatus indefinitely is skipping over the date and the from the editors, you probably get that same information if you click through and go to the article. So it's totally a WCAG violation, but the severity is a lot lower because when you come to the article, you get the same. And honestly, if you don't know the date of the article, it's less important than missing the date of an event. But again, it's hard when you get these repeated content blocks. So technically, I think WCAG might pass this if you put a named region around that and use the article title for a label. But this is my personal biases, right? named regions aren't very helpful, and if you're using that H key to jump heading to heading to heading, you're still going to miss the date and from the editors. So again, I'm not a good designer. I'm a UX person, but if I were going to redo this, I would put the article title first and then move everything else after it. I think those are the main things that I wanted to cover. We got about 10 more minutes for open questions, and then I need to let you all go. Yes, yeah, Lori, I'm doing open Q&A. And now's your moment if you have a question and you want to go first. I need to give more love to my people on Zoom. All right, in the morning session, Lori Jones says, in the morning session, you mentioned about reading order annotations and automatically renumbering if you add or remove a tag. Oh, automatically renumbering is my dream. I'm so sorry, Lori, but I don't think any tools out there actually do this right now. The only place that I've seen the automatic numbering is that there are a lot of tools that will visualize the tab order through the page. So they'll put numbers up. Like there's a Microsoft tool, an IBM tool, and Andy will do this. I love Andy, ANDI from the Social Security Administration. Great little bookmarklet to help visualize stuff to do accessibility testing for people that don't know code. You can get things that will automatically put numbers up on all of the interactive elements on the page. I haven't seen anything that will do that for reading order. But again, that's on a working page. On your designs, I'm so sorry, you're just stuck on your own. No, what I said was that when you reorder yourself, that's why you end up with weird 1.1, 1.2, or 1A, 1B, 1C, because nothing automatically. Other open questions from the group? Yes.
So there's a lot of tools out there. What are your favorites to use, or the ones you use that are critical and with frequency?
So you do have to remember that I'm really technically, most often I do QA testing. I don't actually make designs. I just criticize the designs that my designers make. So I will again mention that I really like Andy from the Social Security Administration, which is a great little tool. And in order to install it, and I borrowed this laptop from Ian, and I hope he doesn't get mad at me for doing this, but I love this because as a bank, my laptop is so locked down, which is why I had to borrow his laptop because I couldn't connect to this. I don't need admin rights to do this. I can just take this, except the touchpad, oh, no, it's highlight. You could just take this and drag it up. There you go. All right, so now I've got Andy. So let's go back to Terry Black, and let's go to their homepage, and let's run Andy. So for instance, it will number all of your tabs on the page. And oh, look, this is number 1, and then it goes back up here. And where's 2 through 7? Bottom. Right? Yeah. So it's got, the reason that I like this tool is because it helps visual. It's a nice little checklist that you can walk through. It helps visualize things for people that don't feel comfortable with the code inspector. And it screenshots well so that when I get into arguments with product folks, I have a screenshot that they can show them, which is a lot easier than recording video. Yes?
Well, and the thing is, I use it right now. We're actually looking at tools,
Mm-hmm.
like Site Improve and Acquia Optimize for Drupal. But in regards to free tools, there's the WebAIM Wave tool, which also does the numbering.
Right. Yep.
And then has
WebAIM
the
Wave
color
is very
contrast
nice.
And, you know, it'll look for form labels and everything else.
But the reason that I have this class is that so much of what we do for design can't like some of those tools will detect design things and say, hey, you need to go look at it. And a lot of them don't even know about it. right? And so it's really hard in design, and especially most of these tools only work on working code, right? And y'all are working ahead of that in Figma or Axure or Sketch or whatever, Adobe XD, and none of these tools work inside those design platforms. So you're just going to have your own internal checklist that you run through. And what I recommend is that you take a couple projects and work through every single one of those checklists until you've internalized them all. And then you'll just start seeing them, and your life will get really miserable because you won't be able to unsee them. But there aren't tools for a lot of this stuff. Lewis, you got a couple. And let's go back left first, because you haven't asked a question in a long time.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm paraphrasing, but you said at the start of the session that you're a connection between developers and designers in the way of accessibility. What collaborative practices have you found in working with those two groups that have been positive to helping move forward accessibility in your company?
So I try to help my designers understand the pain and the gaps that the developers have so that they put more information into their wireframes. And I try to help my developers have empathy for the user experience and understand how their code actually impacts the interface. The other thing is that what we're designing, like for screen reader users, it's an auditory interface. Not many people are used. Like long time ago, I worked for Southwestern Bell, and I worked with some people that worked on IVR design, right? And IVR, press 1 for this, press 2 for that. And a lot of the screen reader design matches onto that, because when you're listening to an interface, you can only remember so much and hear so much at a time. And I have to basically teach a lot of my visual designers how to design auditory interfaces because they're not used to it.
Turn off their monitor.
I'm sorry?
Turn off their monitor.
Turn off their monitor. Yeah, so that can be a good empathy exercise, to put their mouse away, to turn off the monitor. One of the things that you do have, though, is people that are novice screen reader users will throw a lot of accessibility flags because they don't understand how to use the screen reader. And so when we get, it's for a reason, when we were less mature for a while, we actually told people to never, ever, ever use screen readers because we were getting so many false positives that it was slowing all the teams down. It's a little bit like I'm having a lot of, like, if I take a Mac user and put them on a PC for a usability test, or a PC user on a Mac, you're going to report a lot of usability problems because you don't understand the operating system that someone that uses it all the time wouldn't. So I kind of prefer to do the demos myself some rather than having them do it, because they're going to go too overboard in their new ally enthusiasm. Oh, sorry, I didn't.
So as a designer coming from an org that does not have an accessibility team and is working on a product that hasn't always had accessibility in mind in its building, where do we start with moving our product to be more accessible? And what can we do to help build empathy and just general desire to make the product more accessible?
There's only so much you can do, because especially in web accessibility, about 3/4 of the burden falls on the developers. And if they haven't had the training, if your dev and QA folks haven't had the training, you can't fix that problem. Anytime you do a major redesign, it's so much cheaper to do accessibility built into the rebuild, the refactoring of the code, the replatforming, the redesign. So try and find, what we do is we try to find our one partner team that wants to work with us. It's the same way, so I worked with our research team and built our usability research program. I was our first researcher hired, and I'm not with them anymore, but we now have about 15 people. dedicated UX researchers. And we did that by finding the one team that wanted to work with us, doing a lot of usability testing, getting them to be really good, and then everyone else is like, ooh, I want to do what they did, right? So find the one team that really wants to work with you and really get them to do good stuff, and then everyone else will want to jump onto that. Try and find a time when you're doing a major redesign, a major replatforming, because it's cheaper. Also, if you're only going to do a couple things, right, make sure that it's keyboard accessible and everything's labeled. Like that's our, and that you're not doing stupid stuff like blinking things that are going to cause seizures or auto-playing videos. So we have our smoke test of our bare minimum accessibility for entry-level teams, which is keyboard accessibility, labels, text alternatives, no blinking or flashing, no auto-playing content. Make your designs as good as you can, and then give them the text labels for everything. That'll also be a good starting point. Mobile apps are easier. You can take a mobile app and go back after the fact and make it accessible. That's actually possible to do. If a website was not built with accessibility in mind, frequently you can't remediate it without completely redesigning the pages. All right, we're officially at time. I'm happy, I need to let folks go so that you're not embarrassed walking out and stopping. I am happy to stay here and continue to answer questions.